Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the ontology of Immanuel Kant. After learning utilitarianism, we may think that I must do good to bring a greater good for all, to reach happiness from pleasure, or to give happiness for the majority. But the question comes into my mind. Do I need a result to do a good action? Well, I can do something good without any motivation to do so. Maybe I just fear of pain, that's why I seek happiness through everything I did. Or maybe I just submit to my parents' words, so I must go to church every Sunday and worship as a Christian. The other motive maybe I'm just trying to be nice with others, even it need to be a self-sacrifice. When I have certain purpose, then I act a good action. It doesn't mean that I have a good motivation to do so. Well, might say to me that I don't need a result to be good, by the way. Okay, so here we are now. Kant gives us another approach of normative ethics. It is a non-consequentialist ethics, but it is also a more complex theory of ethics to comprehend rather than we usually know about what deontology is. So, deontology is derived from the word deon, that means duty. We usually think that this is a strict and boring ethics because it is a common duty, obligation that not relates to us personally. Maybe we think that, oh, Kant is trying to force us for something that we don't want to do, but we just need to do it because it is necessary good. Well, it might be a false assumption since it is oversimplification of the ontology. So, what is exactly the ontology? It is a normative ethics that doesn't consider any consequences to be ethical. Sure, Kant never consider some purpose can make an action is good. Rather, we are doing good because it is a duty or good in itself. It is a duty for someone to exercise a good action as a rational human being. Our nature as a rational human being is important in Kant's concept of deontology. It has so many implications on what we are going to learn more about. Yes, here we are. The reason of human actually produces a good will to do a good action. A good will is a quality of human nature that doesn't need the consequences to be good. It is a priori. Because we don't need to experience the result of an action to determine the good will. But by definition, the good will is precedent the action, so it is absolutely a priori. Consider also that it is produced by reason alone and not from instinct. So Kant is trying to say that human has an ability to produce a good will because he is a rational being. This good will can be a motive of duty. For example, we are feeding the poor among the pandemic situation because the goodwill from ourselves drives us to do so. But there is also another drive force in human, and that is inclination. Inclination is called also as a self-interest. It is ground for human needs that need to be satisfied. Inclination can motivate someone to do something to do something to get all what he wants, especially happiness, as the sum of the satisfaction of inclinations. Remember, when we try, for example, to feed the poor among this pandemic, we can do it for the sake of our pride or self-esteem as our inclinations. Where now, there are so many people doing social experiment or charity to make a content for their social media, maybe to engage more viewers and to make him famous by gain viewer sympathy. When you read Kant's grand work of metaphysics of ethics, he is always trying to separate a good action from many inclination. Kant said that moral worth and beyond all comparison, the highest that he does good is not from inclination, but from duty. This moral worth actually cannot be achieved without a goodwill. A goodwill is not good because of what it affects or accomplishes, but it is good because of its willing alone, or it is good in itself. This is an absolute, objective, and a priori source of morality. Even the good temperament or personality itself can be good and evil without a goodwill. So goodwill is the highest quality of human very existence. For example, you can have a good personality in your work to gain more money, but you can manipulate it to pursue your boss, and even the money you get from it also can be evil. All these inclinations are far from ethical. All the good things without a goodwill can be evil. Now, you might think that how can a goodwill be possible to universalize duty for all? Yes, it is possible by reason alone. Kant's method starts with a reason. A reason results a goodwill in itself, not for a mean to an end. A goodwill that becomes a mean to an end cannot be said as a goodwill. Yes, it is what we call inclination. Reason cannot serve inclination because it will never be the end of reason. The end of reason must be good in itself, not for the sake of other purpose. Meanwhile, we know that we are a rational being also. So, reason is a universal principle that everyone has in his own nature. The capability of reason allows every one of us to have a good will, so reason can be an objective ground for morality. Well, some of you might think that someone's reasoning is very subjective, though it can be relative to the person. So, how can a morality be objective and universalized to everyone? Um, Actually, when the reason produces a goodwill, both of them actually could produce a maxim too. Then, every of human being must be have its own maxim. So, what is maxim? A maxim is a subjective principle of volition in a person. You must really conscious about this before prejudge to duty. Subjectively, we have a maxim as an individual person, but objectively, we have a maxim by doing the principal law of reason that produces our will. Therefore, our goodwill is done subjectively from ourselves, but also objectively based on the principle of reasons to act the duty. Is the implication is duty is not an external obligation that forces the subject to do so, but duty is very internal that comes from our goodwill and maxim in our own self. Yet it is also objective and universal by the principle of reason. From the principle of reason, we must do a practical law of reason, for the maxim itself is not enough to make us fulfill our duty. Kant reminds us about material maxim that can be contaminated with inclinations and every sensible forces of the sensible world. We need a formal maxim that need to be objective and become a universal law. So, the practical law gives us imperative. This is what deontology needs. Imperative is an objective principle law that necessitating for a will to do a good thing. The key word is ought to. For example, I ought to do my homework because it is good in itself. Yes, this can be an imperative where we comment ourselves. Or another example, I ought to do my homework to get a good score on math. From these examples of imperatives, Kant separates also two kinds of imperatives. The first example is belong to hypothetical imperative. The imperative said, do something if you want to get something. Well, it is an act of good that you still do it to get any consequences of your deed. This action becomes a mean to the furtherance of happiness. Kant said that hypothetical imperatives are problematic because of all the inclinations and purposes and that make imperatives just become a mean. Therefore, hypothetical imperatives cannot be the form of duty. Meanwhile, the categorical imperative commends us. You must do your maxim regardless the ends or consequences. This imperative is an objective necessary in itself without a reference to some purposes. Kant said that this kind of imperative is not concerned with the matter of the action and its present result, but this imperative concerned with its form and with the principle from which it follows, the principle of reason. And what is essentially good in the action consists in the mental disposition, is the goodwill of human. So let the consequences be what they may. This imperative may be called the imperative of morality. Therefore, the categorical imperative becomes the form of duty itself. Now, what consists categorical imperative that makes it enough to do our duty? The first is the universal law of this imperative. The second is the formula of humanity that cannot be excluded from this imperative. And the third is the formula of autonomy in human being as the subject of this imperative. The first, universal law. The categorical imperative must be a universal law. It is an objective law that valid for a rational being, which I have said before. The universal law must be a principle of imperative. If you cannot universalize your maxim, it cannot be a categorical imperative. We must be able to will that a maxim of our action should become a universal law. Therefore, this is also can be a general canon for moral judgment of an action. When we try to judge something is good, we have to consider whether this good action is universalizable. Kant said the principle, please act as if the maxim of your action were to become, through your will, a universal law of nature. We can try to comprehend this law by asking ourselves whether we can universalize our maxims or not. For example, during this pandemic, sometimes I desire not to use mask when I go to mall because it is so annoying to breathe behind the mask. Well, is this a good action? We must examine our maxim. Do I also desire everyone not to use mask when go to mall? Actually, I don't want because it's not good to do so in this pandemic situation. If I cannot universalize my maxim, then it cannot be the duty. I must do the good action itself. Using a mask during this pandemic is good action by itself and can be universalized as a maxim for everyone. So, my maxim is using a mask when I go to the mall or wherever. Another example, sometimes I desire to suicide because of the weakness of my personality to bear the suffering in my life. But before I do this, can it be a good action in life that's full of suffering? Apply the principle. I need to universalize it. Do I want every single human being to do suicide when life is full of suffering? No, I don't. If suicide becomes a principle for human being to face the suffered life, then it cannot be a principle of a good action. Not to just use suicide and preserve life is a good action in itself. So it can be a universal maxim for every one of us. Our duty is to preserve life even life is full of suffering. Remember the key principle. Act as if the maxim of your action were to become through your will a universal law of nature. Now, we need to see more about the formula of humanity that Kant considered to make a categorical imperative. Kant said that human necessarily conceives its own existence as an end itself, do not conceive other purposes, and make our existence just as a mean. If rational nature of human exists as an end in itself, then it is objective enough to derive all laws of human will. It can be said that rational nature is also valid for human to conceive his own existence. For we are the rational being, then the rational nature is the end of our existence to be conceived. Therefore, the formula of humanity must be an objective principle, where the rational nature or reason derives all laws of human's will. Simply, Kant wants to say that every human being is not a mean for others to conceive any kind of purpose. Everyone should conceive his own very existence, which is the rational nature itself. Therefore, Kant say to us to act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a mean, but always at the same time as an end. For example, a premarital sex. This kind of action could become a mean for some people to fulfill their inclinations and desires, even they are doing so by some reasoning. Well, this kind of action cannot be a duty or categorical imperative because it doesn't consider the formula of humanity, where human has to be the end in itself. We may not to treat our partners to do the action because we are not considering themselves as an existence that need to exercise their own will and reason as their ends. Categorical imperative is really considering and paying attention to someone's existence as an end itself. Because of this, a premarital sex cannot be the duty or categorical imperative. Now, the last thing that should be exist in a categorical imperative is someone's autonomy of the will. Autonomy is the form of willing. Likewise, every one of us is rational beings. We are also the very autonomous beings. Autonomy is the property of the will that has been a law to itself. The law of the law of autonomy is independent from every property that belongs to the object of volition. For example, if I want to love a man because he is rich, therefore I am not doing so because of my autonomy, but because of inclination that subjects me to the property of that man. The autonomy is also universal and objective caused by the rational ground of the maxim. So, my autonomy is the form of my reason. But, with, but we need to be careful of heteronomy of the will, where the will doesn't give itself the law, but an alien impulsion does so through the medium of the subject's own nature. Heteronomy, once again, can be full of inclinations. Heteronomy also gives someone a feeling to be the gauge of moral judgment, where it is said that it should be regarded rather as the subjective effect exercised on our will by the law and having its objective ground in reason alone. That kind of feeling is called the feeling of pleasure or satisfaction in the fulfillment of duty. Kant resists this kind of feeling to be our moral judgment because this causality can be very senses rather than rational principle. Therefore, Kant insists the autonomy is inseparably with the idea of freedom. Autonomy must be free. The idea of freedom in which a rational being do an action is independent from determination caused by the sensible world. Human is a rational being, and that makes him free from all senses inclinations, and also be free from determination caused by this sensible world. So, the idea of freedom makes us a member of an intelligible world. A free will is a rational exercise. If someone is conscious of himself as intelligence, then he is independent from all senses impression to be good. Our freedom can be our freedom can become doomed when we resist a reason to do our maxim. I want to conclude this with what Mr. Matthew Malcolm said that in deontology, I want to do the right action because I want to do it, not because I have to do it. So duty is not as simple as what we call a strict obligation. It has to do with categorical imperative to be a good action. Okay, now we have to consider also the objection to Kant's deontology. The first objection is from Iris Murdoch. The first, she said that goodwill is not enough to make someone good, for the good itself is out of the human internal self to make it supreme and objective. You will see further approach of ethics, which is the sovereignty of the good. The second objection is from De Ross. The first, moral judgment cannot be inferred with certainty from its falling or not falling under a rule capable of being universalized. Second, there is no only one motive that work to be good, which is the goodwill, for there is a struggle between a multiplicity of desire having various degrees of worth. And the last, Kant is wrong to think that moral rules have absolute authority admitting of no exception. So, further questions. Can goodwill be universal and be sufficient to motivate someone to do a good action? And can there be a maxim that is universalizable but should be wrong to act on? And the last, can idea of freedom be applied in accordance to moral duty? I hope to see your response in our forum discussion, and thank you.